经是枝繁叶茂，树大根深。
A new bank has given developing countries a louder voice. It was also the worst of times, when the world economy goes at a sluggish pace. Anti-globalization, protectionism, and populism from the West grow stronger. Within BRICS, member countries are haunted by sluggish economy. So, can BRICS speak with a united voice? Is it a new force or a potential threat to global economic order? With time comes truth. Can BRICS stand the test of time?
Can BRICS stand the test of time? And that is also the question we'll be discussing today. So, my fellow co-hosts, welcome once again. Before we go into our specific segments, let's have a quick introduction to tell our audiences what exactly we have come here, what questions we'll be asking, our guests, and what do we want to take away from this forum. I mean, from China's perspective, we understand that altogether our population is about 3 billion. Our economy is almost a quarter of the global GDP, and our economic growth altogether is almost half of the world's economic growth. And in terms of global governance, we are way below that standards. And this is what China would like BRICS countries, together with developing countries, to achieve, to have more equitable, more fair international governance so that, people in developing countries' interests can be better represented. I don't know what is the Russian perspective here, Peter.
Well, I mean, we have to remember where it started out as BRIC. Without our South African colleague here. That was an invention on Wall Street. It was Goldman Sachs. It was about how they were going to make money off of us. Sorry, exploit us, okay? It has evolved immensely, where BRICS now, because we're living in a very tragic time on the international stage. I think there is a chaos in the West, particularly in the United States, where they're supposed to lead the world. And now, this is a very important juncture, because BRICS has been around for a while, but it has to start leading now with alternative, parallel structures on the international stage. I call it a world without the West, because the West is not leading. It's time for us to lead.
So you will be focusing on
media.
Media, okay. What kind of role BRICS can play in that regard? Vishnu, from your perspective?
Well, thank you very much. I think BRICS is an incredible opportunity for all of these nations to truly work together in the partnership that BRICS is always supposed to symbolize. But let's face the facts. Coming into this BRICS summit, India and China have had some very serious differences. And mature diplomacy has been able to resolve, at least for the moment, the standoff that we've seen. India and China need to work together. Will this be symbolized? Will this actually fructify into something substantial at BRICS? That's what I'll be looking at today.
By the way, Vishnu, you are defense editor and principal anchor from NDTV, so naturally you probably will be looking more at security, national defense in that line. Okay, Chriselda, from the South African perspective?
Yeah, for South Africa in particular, we see BRICS as a very important grouping to provide that alternative voice, both politically and economically, on the global stage. In particular, for example, when you look at infrastructure development or the lack thereof in my country and on other parts of the African continent, we're really looking with excitement at the new development bank, which will then fund these key infrastructure projects, which will bolster both growth and development, not just in my country, but of course in other countries on the African continent as well. What we really want to engage on as well is that there was always the belief from these developing nations that the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund was just not working for us. So that needs to take center stage as well. But most importantly, and I think what came out of that clip that you just ran as well, is that these BRICS countries, the leaders of these BRICS nations, really need to speak with one voice on an array of issues of mutual interest, in particular at multilateral institutions, even at the United Nations, if you look at issues of peace and security, for example.
Yes, very important role to be played there as well. Brazil, what will you be paying attention to?
Well, despite the ups and downs of the global economy, all of the BRICS countries, to different extents, of course, they grew a lot in the past few decades. And also, they improved the living standards of their populations. They're having a louder voice. The international community wants to hear from them in crucial issues like the environment. The planet cannot tackle climate change without a full commitment of the BRICS countries. And the question here is how to keep improving living standards, but in a way that you have wisdom in the use of resources.
Very important questions indeed, and we are faced with a lot of challenges on that front. Looking forward to all of these, basically. But, okay, we have an unprecedented format, I believe. Altogether, all of us will just have 1 hour, so 9 minutes for each of us, okay? And we'll be taking the order of politics, national defense, economy, climate change, and China as the host. We'll wrap it up in the end. Ladies and gentlemen, are we ready to talk BRICS?
Yes,
yes, we are.
Big time.
Okay, Peter?
You know, one of the things that I find very interesting is that all of these countries together, and I think it can create a demonstration effect. People will follow BRICS as well, our neighbors in each specific case. But we have to get our message out. And one of the things that really I find very pressing and very bothersome is that we still have Western narratives that dictate what we talk about. It's about media. And we have, since the 2008 financial meltdown, we have a lot of media that's very concentrated. It isn't concentrated in the countries that we come from. It remains in the West. And I look at all of our logos here, you know, and I'll go to our Indian colleague first. I mean, we are necessary. Why are we necessary? I would say we have to break the monopoly of Western narratives about our parts of the world, because they still dictate the pace.
That's right. I absolutely agree with you. I really believe that BRICS is an organization which can, in effect, threaten or perhaps potentially even replace G7. If you look at the creation of the BRICS Bank, that's certainly something which lends a lot of power, potentially, to all the BRICS nations.
When I hear the phrase in Western media, the international community says, the international community thinks, the international community promotes, what are they talking about? Because they're not talking about us most of the time. This is the kind of discursive change that we need, because the international community is the United States and its allies. NATO, throw in Japan, throw in Australia, a few other countries, some in the Middle East, okay? That's their international community. We need to break out of that. We need to take this language to ourselves. We need to appropriate it.
Speaking of which, Peter, you have done a good job on that. I mean, RT has done a very sharp job on that. It's like a knife cutting
some people say we've done a good job. Some people call us quite notorious. I'll take it as a compliment.
Yeah, how do you take that? I mean, I'm flipping this around. I'm really curious.
Well, I take it as I wear it like a thorny crown, if you know what I mean. I mean, as I've said to colleagues before, I remember the first 5 hate mails. I don't particularly care about the last 1,500. But it shows we're making a difference, and that's what we're supposed to do, make a difference here. Journalism and the mission of journalism, I think, is in tatters in the West right now, and we have to use the rule of law, facts, verifiable facts, and always try to stay away from sermonizing, because that's what the West does. It sermonizes the rest of the world in the service of its own interests here. And I'd ask my colleagues who'd like to react to any of that.
Well, I think the internet changed a lot in the international field.
Agreed.
In a positive way when you have more diversity in the news, but also with the advent of the fake news that's spreading like a plague. And I think that the role of a serious media organization or of the journalists is try to bring news that can be trusted to fight fake news.
The term fake news came into vogue when? It only came into vogue a few months ago. After the election of Donald Trump in the United States, we could make an argument about Brexit as well. But they are the purveyors of fake news, not us.
But
and this is what, and it's it's a boomerang against them.
But Peter, we are the ones who need to distinguish between what's fake and what's not. As journalists, credibility and fact-checking every single time, not just because you're going on Twitter, onto Facebook, and you take that and think that that is fact, we've always got to check and ensure that we remain institutions of credibility and disseminate the correct information
I think
to our
What
audiences.
happens is
Whether
that
or
we
not
have to
this
be
is
better
fake-
than best, because the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, the New York Times, all of them, they get things wrong and they never pay a price. We always do when we're wrong.
Yeah, the true stories that they don't like is called fake news. Charles, you want to say something?
Well, actually, I was thinking that it would be very helpful if the BRICS countries, the media of the BRICS countries, do something for each other as well. In terms of describing, I would love to see your program cover more about Russia, for example.
The point. Okay,
Or-
we'll do that.
Exactly. Or India to cover in a
No,
more
I think
positive way
I think that's a
about
really
China.
important point. And in fact, you know, prior to this program beginning, we've been discussing amongst ourselves the importance of media within the BRICS community. And this is a process, a program like this, which we want to actually repeat next year as well. Because BRICS nations need to stop thinking about themselves and need to start thinking about each other as well. And the media has a big role.
But I think also we have to, you know, the dollars and cents of media. Media ownership is very, very important, and it's very, I think, scary right now. Look who owns Google. Look who owns YouTube. Look who owns Facebook. Who owns Twitter? Okay? These are more or less universal institutions, and it's a very tight, controlled ownership. We need, as BRICS countries, to come together to come up with alternatives to those institutions.
I think media diversity is very important. We must ensure that we have many more media houses that are independent, that can speak with one voice, but also very forthright in terms of what they see and communicate with the nations. But secondly, the relationships such as this can go a long way in ensuring that we create a platform for our people to ensure that they tell their own story.
I got a question over here. Go ahead. Constantine, go ahead.
You just said actually about, you know, West owning most of the very influential media, but I think basically, nonetheless, we can use it against Western propaganda. If you remember the history, for example, Chinese history, Chinese invented what? The bullets, the gunpowder, then Westerns use it to come and conquer China, right? That's the same thing we can do. Back to the Western media.
No, we can't. We have to do it because your algorithm can disappear. I mean, they can disappear you in plain sight. And what we need to do is to come up with alternatives to make sure that we aren't disappeared in plain sight. I'm sorry, I see a hand behind our Brazilian colleague here. Go ahead.
Yeah, perspective from Brazil. If you consider that we do not have correspondence from Brazilian newspapers that are actually established in Beijing or in many of these other countries that are part of the BRICS, that makes us lack a lot of information that could be interpreted from a Brazilian perspective and given to the Brazilian public. So what ends up happening is that we're mostly reading other foreign media on their interpretation of what it means to have a relationship with India or Russia or South Africa, and especially their fear against China. And that comes back to us because we cannot have our own interpretation of facts.
I call it 21st century Orientalism. Exactly true. Exactly true. That's
Tell
what it
us
is.
about
In the
fears
age
about
of the
China.
internet.
Yeah.
You have a question over here?
Well, Ms. Wu.
The West media always hold kind of stereotypes towards the Chinese media especially, this kind of pre-mindset. So whatever you do, and then you point their fingers at you. So this time, I think, you know, when we do the program like this, it's really a good showcase for us. To voice out, it's really important.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to television, all of us rely a lot on international news agencies. Yeah. And they are all concentrated in Western countries.
Exactly.
Of course, they have bureaus in other countries too. Exactly. But the kind of coverage they do in Brazil is not the same as the coverage they do in London, for instance.
Yeah. And that's the kind of investment that we have to make. RT has set up its own news service. It's very, very expensive. you have to start from the very bottom. And we've put a lot of time and effort into it, and it's beginning slowly to pay off. But if we could partner all around the table, then you have diminished costs.
I think
we need to do something like that.
I think there's a particular importance for us to know each other better, because we are cooperating, and we need to understand each other better. The countdown clock is there. Shall I continue, or you want to wrap it up?
I'd like someone from our Indian delegation, real quick here before I get cut off here.
I just wanted to point out how the Western media covered Olympics in Brazil. It was from the frame that Brazil is not a very secure country. China Olympics, the frame is too much pollution. And the Russian Olympics was all about mismanagement.
We can't hold Olympic Games. Okay, that's
how
there are so
Western
many
media looks at us.
We end on my section with a very good example. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, there are so many of these examples, really. It's a very bloody history. But thank you very much, Peter, for the 9 minutes. It was great. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Well, Xiamen, thank you very much. India comes into this year's BRICS Summit after having gone through a very difficult experience along with our friends and our partners from China. But I think it's important to reflect on the maturity shown by both countries in resolving the Doklam standoff, the border standoff, where we've had armed guards of either side just a few hundred meters away from each other. The issue itself, as far as the boundary between India and China is concerned, has not been resolved. It was not expected to have been resolved by the time BRICS started. But what has happened, and I think this is a very positive development, is there is a process of de-escalation to a particular crisis in a particular area. And we've got lots of concerns in this particular regard. It is so important to have had that element of de-escalation take place because, let's face it, China and India are not what BRICS is only about. BRICS is about our partner nations, and yes, India and China are very important partners and players within the BRICS process, but concerns, and there are many between India and China, should not necessarily dominate the BRICS proceedings because there is so much more that BRICS needs to do. But I actually wanted to ask a question to some of our Chinese guests today. In fact, I wanted to go across to Mr. Yang of the China Institute of International Studies and ask you, sir, the first question. Shrill rhetoric in the media, whether it's from China or it's from India. We have won, we have achieved a great victory, we have taught the other side a message. At a time like this, when there has been successful diplomacy, is there a danger of shrill rhetoric from either side played out in the media?
It's a very good question. Let me put it by this way. In English, there's a saying, there should be the dog swag the tail rather than the tail swag the dog. And we do have a lot of differences and sensitive differences between China and India. But in general, we do have a larger common ground and a common interest, including the cooperation and common interest in strengthening the BRICS. So compared with the whole dog and the tails, we need to be more smart and more rational. That is the common principle for both of the capitals and both of the great peoples.
Thank you so much. And you know, I mean, I really respect that perspective because there is so much more than the differences we have. No one is in denial of the differences, but the fact of the matter is we need to focus on so much more. One of the key elements of that is trade between the two countries. And we've actually got guests over here who are businessmen and business leaders within the BRICS process. And I just wanted to go across to one of them. Sukrit Chadha deals with textiles and fabric. Sukrit, let me ask you this. This frightening Doklam standoff, fortunately it's ended. was it potentially going to affect your business and your equations between India and China from a business standpoint?
You see, China and India population all put together is about 2.6 billion on the globe. And overall BRICS population is 50% on the globe. And if this thing was not resolved, it was in fact affecting the business because there's, a lack of trust. Because we do businesses on investments, and once there is a fear that, you might have some war or something, the investments can't be put, on either side. So it's a very sigh of relief, and I hope the two leaders, President Xi and PM Modi, they will try and resolve it in an amicable manner so that the business and the trade doesn't get affected. Thank you.
I also wanted to flip the question somewhat, go across to Madhav Nalapat. He's the UNESCO Peace Chair at Manipal University in India, and be somewhat more cynical perhaps and ask the question, can we realistically have BRICS working without India and China talking in the way that they need to be talking?
Well, Vishnu, I'd like to say that we saw from our Chinese friends that the tone would be different. Now, I just want to point out the old Latin point about the tertius gardens, the third party. The fact is that if India and China collide with each other, neither country will gain, some third parties will gain. So you have that kind of situation between India and China. Now, I was quite confident, frankly, that the leaders of the two countries, Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping, will ultimately resolve this for the simple reason, the higher you go in your analysis, that is, the more into the future you go, the broader you go in your analysis, the more comprehensively you grow in the relationship between India and China, not just Doklam, not just a 4,000-kilometer boundary, but a whole complex of issues in which India and China are working together and can work together. It's obvious that the two countries need to be good friends. So my expectation is that kind of a friendship will be further reinforced in BRICS. I was a little dismayed, to see the extreme overreaction to what, in my view as a scholar, was a very minor incident.
But I think there's a reason why the Chinese is overreacting, because over the past couple of years, there have been a series of indications of the kind of hostility we perceive that the Indian governments and the Indian media has been adopting vis-a-vis China, with China as a potential target. I don't know whether my experts would agree with me. Charles?
I make investments in India as well as in China. And I have to agree with you wholeheartedly, because we even see in the Indian press attempts at starting trade war against China, boycotting of Chinese products, Chinese goods. Now, in the Chinese case, I have to say the media is pretty unified in terms of wanting to play down the event. So those of us who are in business don't see any possibility of a war, because it really helps some third party. But the media side from India actually had some very harsh statements.
I take your point, sir, but I think that's a very, very contentious point, because the way we see it in India, as we read the Global Times or we read several other Chinese publications, including publications, online accounts as well, is that China really wanted to up the ante in this particular case. The use of the term war was used in commentaries and editorials in the Chinese media.
There is only one Global Times in China.
India did not want a war, does not want a war.
Don't always
we
look
want
at
peace.
Yeah, we
but
want
China
peace as well.
should not feel India to be a threat. And I think it's questions like this, no disrespect to you, my friend, that add to the negative vibes which we don't need going into BRICS.
China doesn't see India as a threat.
We don't see you as a threat. We don't see you as a threat. We would like you to be a friend.
You have written articles where the headline says, I am China, India and the United States and Japan participate in the largest maritime drills.
But there's a reason for that.
Let's bring it back to BRICS. Let's bring it back to BRICS.
There's a reason for that. But then again, answering that question would turn this BRICS fora into China and India, which is precisely what my initial point was.
You're running out of time.
This has to be about BRICS.
You're running out of time.
I think BRICS should also look at ensuring that there's always a harmonious environment among member countries. It is for that reason, when there are political issues or standoff, the leaders must quickly act. BRICS can't be only about trade and investment, but also political way of solving issues.
One thing this now came to my mind. That is now China, India standoff seems now coming down.
Yes.
But we need to think how to prevent those things coming again.
Would anybody like to take that
BRICS
question?
mechanism can do?
Sure.
Preventing.
Would anybody quickly like to answer that?
I think she's answering the question. She's answering her own question.
She asks an important question. What can be done in terms of a mechanism? Go ahead.
I think, again, we know that the reason, and this is as the Russian side advocated, was that the media plays an important role. What happened in the run-up of the summit was that there were belligerent remarks from both sides of the media, which made it difficult for diplomats to actually resolve this issue. There's a mechanism called the mechanism of special representatives, which exists between India and China, but had there been a coordinated or cordial responses or less belligerent responses from media, it wouldn't have happened. But what we need to work on is build that mechanism of SRs and ensure that such incidents don't happen. They've happened in the past. We've gotten out of them. It took 8 or 9 years. But this mechanism is extremely...
Let's hope this mechanism will work better.
Yeah.
Vishnu, unfortunately, time is up, but thank you very much and congratulations. And Chriselda, from Africa, the newest member of BRICS, the floor is yours.
Well, certainly those are not just the challenges that we're experiencing between China and India. Certainly South Africa, Russia and Brazil are experiencing their own economic challenges at this time. And we think that once this BRICS summit does get underway, these leaders will need to find tangible solutions. You know, South Africa is in a technical recession, and Brazil as well as Russia are experiencing their own economic challenges. Let me quickly bring in the experts there. We'll answer some of the questions relating to that. We'll start with Jeremy Stevens, who is an economist at the Standard Bank Group. Jeremy, I think this is a very critical time that we go into this BRICS summit. We've got these many challenges. How do we ensure that the vision of BRICS is not derailed because of these challenges?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, I would take umbrage to the idea that, you know, whether South Africa's cyclical macroeconomic dynamics are weakening or not really derails the idea of the BRICS. The BRICS were always about a structural phenomenon, about their overall size in global economics, their global trade and investment, how they're reshaping global trade and investment chords, the emergence of BRICS corporates that have risen over the last 10, 15 years to reshape these global trade patterns. And I think that that's really the essence of what the BRICS grouping is about. I do think for South Africa, for example, we've got a problem with unemployment, and you know how the BRICS can help us in facilitating job creation. That's something we need to put on the table. For China, it may be renminbi internationalization and maybe financial sophistication development. And for Brazil, it might be infrastructure, or India infrastructure. We'll have to link the BRIC partnership to domestic dynamics. But the cyclical story in our macroeconomic development, obviously we have to apply our minds to it. In South Africa, it's important, it's relevant, but that's not going to derail the BRICS at all.
Vision at all. Let me bring you in there as well, Bradley Brow, who's the president of Asia Pacific. Tourism is one of the critical aspects, you know, that South Africa looks at. In particular, the fact that it could advance the economy or the growth of any country. How do you package these countries to make them attractive for tourists or visitors?
Thank you very much. I think the most important thing is that the packaging needs to be authentic. It needs to be something that the tourists are looking for. It's very, very important. You cannot sell something that you want to sell. You need to sell what the countries are looking for. Our numbers have grown dramatically from China, and also from the BRICS member countries have grown dramatically to South Africa. And what we have done market research, looked at what each country is looking for as a tourist, and we are delivering on that.
Thank you. Let me bring you in there, Sophie Mokoena. It's not business as usual as we go into this summit. From a political perspective, you know, how important is BRICS as a bloc?
Well, indeed, it's not business as usual. There are lots of challenges in terms of peace and security around the world. You look at what's happening currently in the Korean Peninsula, you look at what's happening in the Middle East, and I think it is important for all the countries to speak in one voice, particularly at the multilateral fora like the United Nations. That will create a better climate for all the peoples of the world to ensure that they live in a more peaceful world. And it is for that reason, BRICS cannot be only about development and economic growth, but they must also look at the political challenges at a time where the Western world is found wanting and there are divisions. BRICS must speak in one voice in all these multilateral institutions.
But how do we ensure that this is not just another talk shop? We need BRICS to be taken seriously and to deal with some of the pressing issues that are facing our countries.
As journalists, as the media, we must monitor and evaluate what they are doing and ask hard questions if they don't deliver. Let's go back and look at the resolutions of the last summit. How far are we? What have we achieved? Indeed, we have achieved the BRICS Bank. Let's clap the hands. Well done. But let's also ask hard questions where there are problems. For an example, free movements of goods and services and people is still a problem. Well, the issue of visas.
I think you're being
idealistic.
It's being very idealistic, okay? You want to duplicate the G7. No, we shouldn't do that. Because G7, under the leadership of the United States, demands other members of the G7 to resign from their sovereignty and their own destiny. Yeah. I don't want that to happen to BRICS, okay? BRICS countries have to have their sovereignty respected. And I do believe it should be about trade, and it should be about investment in each other, okay? Because when you go too far, like the European Union, you leave a lot of people behind. You leave the middle class, and the middle class is our greatest advantage. That is our greatest advantage, and we don't sell them down the river.
Hold on. If you look at it in terms of trade, what South Africa, for example, has benefited between 1995 and 2011, you're looking at growth of trade with the other BRICS countries of about $5 billion to $25 billion. So we're talking about trade benefits here that have...
But that's what I'm talking about too. Exactly what I'm talking about.
Sorry, can I jump in?
You want to come in?
Yeah, so for me, I think that you touch on a very important point. We need to create successes as a group.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right? So the world is looking at us and they're quite skeptical.
Yes.
And we have this anti-Western rhetoric, and really it's about let's deliver on real, tangible realities. Now, the BRICS Bank is a very important catalyst for that, because it creates an institutional underpinning for the BRICS to work together for mutual benefit, to service their economies and development. And so we need that to be the champion of the BRICS to start with. Once we get those benefits sort of materializing and being tangible, you can build later.
And then it creates a demonstration effect as well.
I think it's a red herring for us to say, on all international forums, we're going to repeat the same message as each other, because we have diverse needs and realities.
We seem to have a question from the China
side. To share my observation, I think there's a point I tend to agree with my colleague from South Africa. BRICS countries represent 43% of the population of the whole world. So if we can develop ourselves and lift ourselves out of poverty, that's a huge contribution to the global development. Probably to take care of the issues, important issues facing the nation could be next step. Of course, we are paying attention to that. But take the issue once at a step, probably. Thank you.
Chriselda, there was a question here as well.
We have a question from India as well.
Yeah.
I totally agree with what you're saying. We keep on comparing ourselves to the G7. I don't see any reason why. Between 5 countries, we have more people and more money than most countries combined in the whole world. We don't need to be dependent on anybody. If we can somehow work on better tourism policies, more easy visa-free access between our countries, we can get so much more between trade, tourism, and just generally friendship, happiness, all that.
I see China wants to go at it again.
No, actually, just to add very quickly, China sent 130 million tourists abroad last year, spent over $280 billion, more than double what the U.S. travelers have spent. Just the simple fact that BRICS exist and promoted in China as an organization, however you describe it, as an association or bloc or whatever, the simple fact that the Chinese population is now looking at BRICS as an entity, they will look at going to South Africa and Brazil.
Oh, and they come to Moscow en masse, okay? We got a question over here, too.
Just that informal association alone can bring benefits in terms of tourism.
Maybe it's better it's an
Let me take one from Russia there as well.
Thank you very much for the word. Especially like if we're talking about BRICS, it's very important to understand the point of economical development. So China, India, Russia, and Brazil is inside of like BRICS. And what is the most important point we need to understand, and we need to ask South Africa, why like when a lot of money are coming from China to Africa, why South Africa is not the major point and not is the major partner of Chinese money, of Chinese partners, of Chinese economical development in that kind of region. So I think like if we're talking about BRICS, we need to understand common points.
Yeah.
We need to understand how we need to develop this business together, and we need to understand what kind of regulatory affairs and regulatory issues we need to create on the platform of BRICS in the beginning. And after that, we need to move to the political points, to the security points,
Okay, we're running out of time, and I think,
points.
apologies for that, we're running out of time, but I think it really brings back to what we've all been saying about the fact that we need to tell our own stories. We cannot have other people telling our stories. It gives a complete, different view of exactly what our countries are about. If we can start with that as media practitioners to begin with, I think we're really on the correct footway.
And I think it's a very good question. What exactly is BRICS? But sometimes, does it really matter? I mean, can we just do it as the way it is?
And now it's time to talk about global warming. And one of the hot topics these days is the decision taken by the American government to leave the Paris Climate Agreement. The BRICS countries released a statement in July saying they are still back in the agreement. But what kind of threat this American position can pose could it jeopardize the whole effort that has been done in order to achieve the Paris Agreement? I would like to start asking that question to one of our experts. It's Mr. Harvey. He's from China Daily.
Well, we have a saying in English that be careful what you wish for because it might come true. Since 1823, with the enunciation of the Monroe Doctrine, people in Latin America have been saying, Yankee, go home. We've gone home, or we're in the process of going home. And this cuts both ways. The good way is there's a vacuum. It needs to be filled. BRICS can fill it, the same way that China is filling much of the vacuum that's left by President Trump and his decision. The bad thing is, yes, we have been major actors, but it takes about 4 years to get out of the Paris Accord, and so we have a lot of time. And I predict that President Trump won't be there in 4 years, so I think maybe a lot of the damage can be undone.
Okay, another very important topic when you talk about environment. Some of the BRICS countries, they rely heavily on the oil industry. We can talk about Russia, we can talk about Brazil, where the pre-salt layer is perceived by many as a ticket to prosperity. And are the BRICS countries prepared for a post-oil economy? I would like to start asking to the Russian friends there what they think about this issue.
Go ahead.
Representing Russia, I don't see a huge problem about that right now, and I don't think that Russia should get prepared for the post-oil economy, so to call it, because, well, as we all know, China creates a lot of demand for Russian oil and gas. If to look at the CNPC forecast, oil and gas should still take more than 1/3 of Chinese energy demand, which will be majorly provided by Russia. As you know, we start exporting gas to China starting from the next year. We're already the world's biggest exporter of oil to China. So I think for both of our countries, for China and Russia, probably a lot of other BRICS countries as well, it's too early to talk about the post-oil economy. In any case, even if we start talking about that, we have a lot of markets within BRICS to develop their post-oil economy.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about China now. China is still the single largest polluter in the world. And yet, China is back in the Paris Climate Agreement and also is making a huge effort in order to increase its solar capacity and solar energy capacity, which is already the largest in the world. And I would like to ask you, when and how do you think the country had this change of paradigm towards a greener economy?
When we talk about climate change, you need to look at a historic point of view.
Of course, yeah.
Scientists have said the greenhouse gases that are emitted into the ozone layer stay there for decades, even up to 100 years. So when we are talking about the global warming, what has caused global warming is not China's biggest share of pollution, but rather the developing country during their industrial revolution, all the gases that they have emitted.
Yeah.
So that is the reason why China has been saying, okay, we are one of the biggest polluter, but we should not be the only one or taking up the biggest share. That is why all the BRIC countries and developing countries have this common but differentiated responsibility.
Yeah, but my point is that...
And also, responding to Harvey, sorry, when you say when the United States doesn't want to take up the leadership, then, you know, the BRICS countries should fill the vacuum.
Exactly.
I don't agree.
Yeah.
Who says the United States can go away from this? They have a historic and present responsibility because the United States is among the top 3 polluters. So they cannot just simply walk away from this. By the way, they were already lagging behind their targets. They were not going to meet their targets that they promised under the Obama administration. And now they opt out. I don't think that's acceptable.
But my point was that China seems to have a new policy, it's not
because
something new.
Because it is important for China as well. We live, we breathe this air, and it is important for our health, for our happiness, and it is to our interest that we have to cut down on greenhouse gas emissions. That is why we also have one of the highest targets to cut back CO2 emission by 2030, I believe. That is, we want to cut down by as much as 65%. That is the highest all countries in the world have promised.
The lady in red behind you wants to say something.
Oh, yes. I think you are right. We are doing the shift right now from those investment-driven economy now to the innovation-driven economy. Anyway, maybe I have slightly agreement with our anchor because I don't think Trump, if he's there, administration is there, if they're in, that's okay. If they're out, also, this fighting global warming up is still continue on the way. We don't need to count on any single government or any single president to support this career because this is highly close with our daily breathing. So that's the thing we need to do.
Yeah, actually, it's everyone talking about sustainable development, but the thing is that where it comes from technology. The technology comes from the science. But I heard that especially China and Russia is working very together on the science, but in other countries not working. So if you are talking about the sustainability, so you should work on the one platform with the science. So it will come on innovation. So it will not come innovation, you cannot do the sustainability. And you have to, with all countries to work together for the science in the one BRICS committee.
Because I think that's an important point, but I just wanted to ask you another point. I think Brazil has been a real model when it comes to the use of ethanol in cars. Yeah. Brazil is a democracy, India is a democracy. One of the biggest problems that we've seen in India is once we had our big economic growth, the first thing people did if they had the money was to go and buy a car. We've seen this in China as well.
It happened the same in Brazil.
What exactly have been able to do so successfully to convince people you don't necessarily need a high-performance petrol or diesel car, shift to ethanol, it's cleaner? And why have people accepted that?
Because ethanol many times is cheaper. And the new cars, they have new technology, and also the ethanol has more or less the same power as petrol engine. And also because Brazil has been doing this for a long, long time, from the 70s. And so it had the time to sort of optimize the technology. And or I would say more than 90% of the cars made in Brazil, they are dual fuel. You can put either petrol or ethanol in any proportion. So it makes it easier for the consumers to choose what they want to do. Like in my case, I always use ethanol, but also it makes more sense economically as well. Mr. Tanjin, you've been trying to speak something for a long time.
Yes. One thing I've noticed is that there's a tendency to demonize the West, the United States in particular.
We're just stating the facts.
No, I'm not saying that. But it won't solve your problems. The issue is all of you have a good story. all right, especially China, and the rest of you can be part of that. Now, the question is how you do that. There is one proposal on the table, and only one worldwide, and that is the Belt and Road Initiative. To the extent that you can come together on such types of initiatives, whether they're economic or trade, is the basis by which you can solve a lot of not only the demonizing the West by putting your own story first, but also the tendency sometimes to demonize each other. You have to get above that, but still have the courage, as the press, to look internally. There are questions of corruption, all right? There are questions of misuse of nationalism, all right? These are all issues that we must confront, but trade is going to have to be the #1 issue that brings you together. Otherwise, it is not sustainable. Thank you.
And do you still have time for one more?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Okay, Larissa.
Maybe one more quick comment from China as well. One sentence, please.
Yeah, 2 comments. First of all, after you convince people financially that it makes sense to use ethanol, they start, like in my case, using it because they believe it's better for the environment, even if it's more expensive. And I totally agree with the idea that the BRICS has to focus on trade or economic development in general. In that sense, what Brazil needs, and I believe what India needs, is infrastructure. So infrastructure is the key for the focus of the
Road.
Neo Development Bank and the Belt and Road.
Thank you very much, Marcelo, and a round of applause.
If you ask this pretentious mixologist what is needed to make the ultimate cocktail, she'd say, a thorough knowledge of science. Ooh, right in the face. Yes. If you asked us, we'd say it's less about science and more about, well, chemistry.
Get a 750ml bottle of Captain Morgan Spice Gold and 1 litre Coca-Cola for $119.99 from Tops at Spar.
Well, I think China's perspective is very important. As I mentioned in my opening statement, China wants to have a fairer, more representative, more equitable international global financial and economic governance. We were talking about the World Bank and IMF reform. Even after the reform, the rights altogether, combined rights of BRIC countries is still less than that of the United States, and the United States is still the one country in IMF to have veto power. They have over 15%, but if you look at economy size, the United States, in some sense, is already not the largest economy in the world. But again, we have this obstacle because after the last round of reform has been reluctantly pushed through the U.S. Congress, some U.S. congressmen have said we will not let that happen in the near future. So in terms of making the international economic and international financial governance more equitable, what can we do? Where should we start? I wonder if anybody thought about that. Our Indian friends, please.
The reason they tried for the BRICS to be created was the 2008 financial crisis. What has happened over the years, and which shows the potential that BRICS has, is that we've coordinated our responses and World Bank. When we talk of economic issues, we need to understand that BRICS is a bloc. It is not a global system right now, but within ourselves, we've coordinated in those financial systems that already exist. Now, as we try to create those systems, including a new credit rating agency, we try to establish a new development bank, which I think last month announced that they would be funding projects for about $3 billion. We need to understand how we create a new global financial structure. Again, we talk about, you mentioned United States having 15%. Together, when BRICS combined together, they were able to get a reform package at World Bank that increased our shares by 6%.
Yeah.
So while BRICS in itself, at the moment, cannot create a new financial order, it can use the strength that it has to influence it and make a dent.
Yeah, that's going to be step by step, and that's going to take quite a while. But let us talk about the European perspective. Maybe, Mr. Wittke, you are probably in the best position to talk about this issue. How is the voice, the aspiration of BRIC countries seen in the Western bloc?
First of all, of course, we see it as an investment opportunity in all these BRIC countries, be it in the energy sector, be it in consumer story in China. But I guess that what we're looking at is really BRIC leadership in existing organizations like WTO. That is not just rhetoric, but actually that the BRIC countries set a stage of lowering the import taxes by making investment easier, facilitating this, fighting corruption together, because that is what mars these countries. And I guess for European business, the kind of sustainability and predictability in the investment climate is totally important. Some countries lead better than others, but definitely the BRICS story is for us a growth story.
The reason why BRICS countries gather all together was to promote the trade and investment, right? And based on a fair competition, we can make a strong international ties between our countries and other countries and unions. This will be a good example how other countries can follow us. And here comes my question. About half a year ago, China mentioned BRICS Plus, which consists of 30 plus other countries. Could you please comment what is the idea of it?
Well, I understand that the Chinese government does have that in mind, and it's actually one of the very important items on the agenda this year, which is BRICS Plus. First of all, it should not just be a small clique group of more advanced countries in the developing world, but there are other countries that are also developing very fast. So this year we are inviting 5 additional countries joining this summit, for instance, from Egypt, Mexico, Tajikistan, Thailand, and Guinea. So why these countries? There are various considerations, either because of their economic development or because of their geographical location. But the idea is they come here, but they also have to uphold a certain value that the BRICS countries uphold together. It's not the same ideology, but we to believe in the same thing, for instance, openness, inclusiveness, cooperation, and win-win. So if these countries are willing to join BRICS in an informal manner, then why not? I mean, the bigger the group, the stronger our voice will be. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, please.
I'd like to add one more point. The short answer is, just as our Russian host mentioned just now, say we are not a G7. Let's say we are G5 BRICS, but that's not a typical westernized group. The G5, the BRICS, is open and inclusive. That is why China initiated the so-called BRICS Plus. That really reflect our openness and inclusiveness, and have a greater contribution to a world order reshaping.
I think we have to avoid one size fits all, and this is what my criticism of a lot of Western institutions, decided by a very small group of people, even elites within a country. So one size doesn't fit all. We can be flexible. We have conflict within the group. And maybe because of BRICS itself, we saw this conflict between 2 members simmer down. Maybe that was an important element. I hope it is. And if it is, then it's already shown the group's worth. Okay?
Yeah.
But one size does not fit all. We have to move away from that.
What was what was the feeling of Russia being, expelled from the G8? Is that
Oh, that's not fair, because we had talked about this with you last night.
No, I mean, I hope this kind of thing doesn't happen to the BRICS.
Okay, I can't
right?
say between what I think and what Russia thinks. I mean, of course, I think the official line was that they probably weren't very happy about it. But I think, on the other hand, is that, as a member of BRICS, and looking at the problems that face the world, a lot of the problems that the world faces is because of the G7 and their policies. Economic policies, trade policies, security policies, I can go on and on. And I have always personally, Peter Lavelle, okay, this is on TV, I have always felt that Russia didn't really belong in the G8, because the G8 has to solve the problems that they created. Russia didn't create those problems, okay? And we have to remember the G7 was a Cold War institution. The Cold War is over a quarter a century ago.
Okay, they can exist so long as they're, they want to stay together. But what is the Indian perspective? I see a lot of hands on the Indian side. Okay, this gentleman first.
Yeah, I can talk about one thing, that's unity in diversity. There are differences among some of the BRICS countries, like India, China, but I think there has to be more communication more cultural exchange, art, sports, because India, China, they are like ancient civilizations. Similarly, when it comes to sports, South Africa, India, like we have a strong sporting partnership. We can learn from China, Russia, because they are the host countries of Olympics. So is Brazil. So Football World Cup. So I think more and more people know about each of these countries. Common people, businessmen, traders. I think that's more important to build a stronger BRICS. So I believe that we should encourage, all the BRICS countries should encourage more like cultural exchange, art and trade exchange programs.
That's a great point you're making. I think that is one of the most important things we should do, is for our country to have more cultural human context. That lady in the South African part.
Yes, absolutely. On those lines, I think the cultural exchanges are extremely important. How likely are we in this BRICS able to come to a one voice to address these multilateral institutions? How likely are we able to get together, 5 voices together to strengthen our political leverage, so to say, and actually come together with one voice on so many different issues, like cybersecurity, counterterrorism, sustainable developments? How likely are we?
Yeah, I think that point is very much taken by the leadership of the BRICS this year, because they are putting particular emphasis on this kind of exchange we're talking, because for this organization to really function, the people of each country really have to understand it, right? Identify with it. Who are the members of the BRICS, for instance? I think now that they know it a little bit better. Okay, my time is up. Thank you very much. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we have each had our time to talk, and sometimes it was heated, sometimes it was, more civilized. But looking back, what have you gotten out of this conversation? What will you take home and maybe think a little bit about? Peter?
For me, it's kind of gone full circle from what we heard about cultural exchanges and things like that. We need a medium to do that. We can't rely upon Google and Reuters to do that for us. They are a filter, and they are demonizing us. That filter does demonize us. But this gentleman over here in the South African delegation, and I'll finish with this, and I think he is spot on. We have to lead through our successes, and when we're successful, people will follow us, okay? Successes.
Yeah, Vishnu?
I think BRICS is successful. I think that success resides in the fact that there is incredible talent, there is incredible economic opportunity, and there's also incredible economic success. I think the ability of all of us to be able to sit together and talk together, work through our differences, augurs well for this particular group. And so for me, the essential message, or the essential learning aspect is the fact that there are so many common interests that these countries have. It's about realizing this potential when our leaders sit together.
Yeah, it's a great point. Chriselda.
Well, I think it's very important for us to acknowledge that we really need to start telling our own stories. And I really want to agree with the gentleman from the Brazil side that we need to start focusing on all the negatives that we have. We may have challenges within this bloc, but those are resolvable. And once we are able to acknowledge that, we would be able to take full responsibility for the challenges that we have in our respective countries and find internal solutions to that. We don't need to look outside for answers to our problems. We can find them amongst ourselves. So I think that's very important.
Great point, Brazil.
What I see in front of me now is diversity. So many views that I myself sometimes didn't know about. And I learned a lot here today. And I think our people, the people from Brazil, from China, South Africa, all of our people should have the opportunity to have this kind of information more often. As you said, Peter, we have filters that sometimes don't bring the information we should have, but the information they want us to have.
Exactly.
So I think this kind of debate here is very productive, and I congratulate GTN for the initiative and for the hard work to make this show happen.
Thank you so much. Thank you. You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you. Well, I think it's really been an exciting journey for us as well to have all of you here. Honestly, just a couple of days ago, we didn't know how we're going to do this show because India and China were in a standoff. How are we going to pretend we're friends if our soldiers are still, exchanging stones? But it was great relief when the news came that this standoff finished. We really hope that we have understood each other a little bit better. And now that we are able to sit here together, I think it's a great experience. By the way, I don't think we demonized each other. I know. I think we had disagreements, and we always try to have the discussion in a civilized manner. Without discussion, you will not know each other better. Anyway, that has been it for our very first, hopefully, BRICS Talk. This program has been brought to you by CGTN, but all the 5 different channels will be transmitting this program on their respective channel. As for the new media, for CGTN, you can go to cgtn.com, or you can follow me on Twitter or Facebook using the handle The Point with Alex. Download the application called CGTN Live to watch our show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point.
And for RT, you can go to rt.com, you can go to our YouTube page, Facebook, and of course, Twitter.
Well, you can watch NDTV if you're in India and in several parts of the world. You can also track this program on ndtv.com. You can also download our app to access it. And you can also reach out to me. My Twitter handle is Vishnu NDTV.
And you can also check for when this program will run on my Twitter handle at Chriselda Lewis. And you can also go to our digital platform at SABC News Online for all the details on when this will be aired.
If you want to watch this program translated to Portuguese, go to sbt.com.br or also to our Facebook page.
Okay, that is it for the very first BRICS Talk. We hope to see you next year at the same time. Bye for now.